Hello, party people. Another Wednesday is upon us, and I can see that many of you are eagerly waiting. And I don't blame you, because I am joined here today by Manuel from HTMHell. Yes, I must say it right. Which is a blog and YouTube, not YouTube, we're on YouTube now, a blog, a Twitter feed, and a website, all about bad things to do with HTML and good things, which is why Manuel has kindly joined us today to tell us what we've all been doing wrong for all these years. Yes, we are going to be talking about how to turn a design into a fully fledged website from a mockup, how to check and validate your HTML to make sure you're not writing complete rubbish, the most common HTML errors, the importance of semantic HTML, whether sections are bad, whether divs are bad, using HTML to validate user interactions, and whether we need to know all HTML elements. There's over 100, you know. And we do these sessions live, so you can ask your questions in the chat. Yes, leave them there. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. But first, a very warm welcome to Manuel.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for having me.
Very excited for this session. Thank you for joining us. HTML seems so simple, but I don't think it is. Is that fair to say?
It depends on which part of the language you are talking about. So I would say that learning HTML, like the syntax, how the language works, is quite easy. I mean, I try to avoid the expressions easy and simple and so on, because something might be easy and simple for one person but not for the other. But generally speaking, based on my experience also with students, I would say that it usually doesn't take a long time to learn how HTML works, so that there are start tags and end tags, and that you can add attributes to elements and so on, and you can nest elements and all the things you can do in HTML. But writing a good document, like a semantic document, one that also works for search engines, and just like a beautiful document that works for everyone, this is pretty hard. And I would say that the majority of developers doesn't do a good job writing HTML.
Yes, more about that shortly. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to create this wonderful and witty blog, HTMHell?
Yes, of course. I would like to do that. I started writing HTML when I was 13. So that was 22 years ago. And yes, this is also around the time I also built my first website. And I was always interested in web development. And then I started to learn it properly, and also started to learn CSS. And then I became a professional web developer in 2008. So I started to charge money and also started to work for agencies and so on. And I pretty much did anything that would bring money in. So I did front end and back end, and even animation and video and all kinds of things related to web development. And over the years, I specialized more and more in front-end development. And in recent years, like in the last 5 or 6 years, I specialized in web accessibility. And HTML is a huge part of accessibility. And I work for the city of Vienna, and I work there as a front-end developer, but I'm also responsible for generally for accessibility. And I'm also a freelancer. And as a freelancer, I do so-called accessibility audits. So companies pay me to check whether or not their websites are accessible. And doing this job, I see a lot of code others have written. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And eventually I started to share some of the really bad things that I saw in these audits, and also on other websites that I checked in my free time, because it's also, a hobby. Probably not the best hobby or the most exciting hobby, but yeah, it's my hobby. And then one day, jokingly, I said, I should probably turn this into a blog because I kept sharing so many things. And also people sometimes started asking me, why is this bad? Because I just said, this sucks, this is not good, don't do this. But people, not all of them, not all of my followers knew why this is bad. And yeah, so like occasionally sharing bad code on Twitter turned into a blog where I pretty much do the same thing. So I post a screenshot, or actually the code. I paste the code in there that I found. I remove all the traces that would lead to where I got it from, because I don't want to blame or shame anyone. That's not what it's about. It's really about the code. And then I explain what's wrong about it, and I also offer better solutions, or what I think would work better for users.
Brilliant. Yeah. So that is a brief overview of what HTMHell is all about. So go and check that out after this stream. You might see some things which you knew were bad, or maybe some things you didn't know were bad. There's also a heaven section, which I think is nice for the things you should be doing. So definitely check that out. It's interesting you've already mentioned the accessibility side of things, because one of the very first comments was, yes, bring it on. I'm especially excited for the A11Y part. Now, A11Y, there's many ways of saying this. Can you explain for the wonderful people watching who might not have come across this phrase before, what it means and what your accessibility audit typically looks like?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So A11Y, or ALI, is a numeronym, and it stands for the letter A, the 11. So it's a shorthand for accessibility, and it stands for the letter A, the 11 letters in between, and the letter Y. So it's just a shorthand for accessibility. Accessibility is a pretty long word, and it's also very easy to get it wrong, to bring a typo in there, because there are many I's. And so sometimes LE is easier for some people. But at the same time, there's also, some people say that the numeronym itself isn't accessible because many people don't know what it means. So yeah, some people like it, some people don't like it. There's some discussion around that. But yeah, it stands for accessibility. And how does an accessibility audit look like? So there are a few things I do. It takes some time to do a proper audit, but I also have this thing called a 7.5-minute audit that I teach people in my workshops, which is the shortest possible way of getting a general idea of the accessibility of a website, which works like this. So the first thing I do is I run a automatic test. There are some automatic testing tools where you pretty much just press a button and they will run a bunch of tests, usually written in JavaScript, on your site or on the page that you are on. And they will run these tests, and then they will list errors if there are any errors. And depending on the tool, they will tell you what's wrong and how to fix it and where you will find it in your code. So there's automatic testing. This is really great. Automated testing is an essential part of web development, if you ask me. So I would never, ever build a website and publish a website without running one of these tests. It's just automated testing tools are fantastic for catching low-hanging fruits. So low-hanging fruits means for stuff that's easy to detect, but also at the same time easy to get wrong. Sometimes, you just know how to build stuff, but maybe there's a typo or you forget to close an element, and this has some consequences and so on. Yeah, so this is the first thing I do. And the second thing, and this is one of my favorite ways of testing accessibility, is to test with the keyboard. So instead of using the mouse, I use the tab key on my keyboard. Usually on most keyboard layouts right next to the Q key, and you just use it, and this allows you to jump from every interactive item on the page to another interactive item. So interactive items are things like a link, a button, an input field, a text area, select, scrollable areas in some browsers, and so on. And then you try just to use the website without the mouse. And if you can access all the errors on the website, if you don't get stuck anywhere, if you can do all the things that you can do with the mouse, then I would say you have a more than a great baseline when it comes to accessibility of a site. Maybe one more thing, you don't just use the tab key, so you can jump from one item to another item using the tab key. If you want to go back, you press Shift Tab. So this is just the opposite direction. And for some things, you might need arrow keys, like for example, selecting options in a select element. Or if you want to press a button, you need space or enter.
Interesting. It's quite surprising to me how many websites you actually can't navigate with the tab key, because I sometimes don't like to use the mouse because I'm out and about and I haven't got it with me, or for whatever reason. And I had one the other day where I tried to tab, nothing happened. So not good. Out of interest, you mentioned going back is, I think, Shift Tab. Is it not the case that if it works with tabbing, it's definitely going to work backwards then, or do you have to test both?
Yes, that's definitely true. But sometimes it's not just a matter of getting from A to B, but a matter of trying to figure out how a component works. And maybe you want to go back because you want to approach things differently or try to navigate differently. For example, if you have a website with a huge menu, like one of these mega menus where there are many different items, and you get in there and you see that it's badly built and you're not able to access certain parts of the navigation, you might want to go back and, I don't know, try the search instead, for example. So this is just, it's just, you don't need it often, but you might need it.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. When you mentioned the automatic testing, was that something like, I'm familiar with Lighthouse. Is it that kind of thing, or is it something different?
Exactly. It's something like Lighthouse. So in Chrome, there is a built-in tool called Lighthouse, and you can perform all kinds of different tests, like performance or search engine optimization tests, or just general best practices. And there's also an accessibility category. And if you select that and you click on Generate Report, if you scroll down a bit, Analyze Page Load, sorry.
Maybe this?
Yeah. Because you have the experimental snapshot feature enabled. This is why it's labeled differently. Then Lighthouse will run a bunch of tests, like I explained earlier, and you get a score. And I mean, you ran the test on the A11Y project, which is a beautifully built and also very accessibly built website, so you get a score of 100. That's usually not the case. Try any other website and you probably don't get 100. Don't try it on HTML, because HTML is also, I think, I've also a score of 100. But normally it will say something like score 50 and then list all the tests that you didn't pass. In this case, all the audits have been passed, but you can click on show right next to past audits. Or just on past audits? No.
Right.
Exactly.
Oh.
Okay, so these are the tests that Lighthouse ran. So it's checked if there are valid ARIA attributes, if images have an alt attribute, if the page has a title, and so on. And if that's the case, it's fine. You pass the test. If not, then this has negative consequences on the score. And you always want to aim for 100, definitely.
Yeah, you do. And when I've used this and it hasn't been 100, it tells you what you need to do to fix it. So it's very user-friendly, very nice way, to test. Low-hanging fruits, as Manuel said.
Yes, this is one tool. It's pretty nice. There's another tool called XDevTools. And XDevTools is a third-party tool. So it's an extension that you have to install on Chrome or Firefox. And Jess said it. There's also an extension for VS Code that you can enable. So while you're typing your HTML, X will run the tests, which is also great. And the main difference between X and Lighthouse is that they both use the same engine. So they both use the X core engine, but Lighthouse only uses a subset of the tests. So it might happen that X will find more issues on a page, and the user interface is a bit different. And there is also a paid version of X DevTools, which offers guided testing. This can be especially interesting for people who are not very experienced with web accessibility testing. So X will run. By the way, I'm not selling here. I'm just telling you what it does. I don't have a pro account or any affiliation with X. It runs a test, and then it will also tell you how to do manual testing because, and this is really, really important, probably one of the most important things that I tell you today, just using automated testing tools isn't enough. It's like a great baseline, but automated testing tools will only catch about, 30 to 60% of issues on your website. So you definitely have to do manual testing as well.
Okay, so is this the tabbing you were talking about, or are there other manual tests you also need to do?
Yeah, so like I said, I have this 7.5 minute evaluation test, which is just a short way, a quick way to find out how the general quality of the site is. And when I do that, I run X and then I use the tab key, and this will tell me enough in order to give a first first recommendation if something has to be fixed or not, or just a first impression of the overall quality. But if you want to do proper testing, you would also want to zoom the website, for example, or the page, like zoom it up really high, up to 400%, and see if it still works. You want to use a software called ScreenReader. So some people use a software to read content on a page. Most of them are blind people, but not exclusively. Also people with low vision, and also some people with learning disabilities who use a screen reader in addition to what they see on the screen. And the screen reader does all kinds of things, but the most basic thing it does is it reads the content on a page. So if you have a heading, it will read accessibility testing, heading 1. If you have a link, it will say read more link and stuff like that. And this is also what I do in these tests. So I use this software. There are a bunch of different screen readers. So for example, on macOS, you have VoiceOver. It comes with the operating system on your MacBook and also on the iPhone. You have TalkBack on Android, which also comes with the device and the operating system, also for free. There's NVDA for Windows, which is also for free. And there's JAWS, which costs something, also for Windows. And there are some others, but these are the major players, I would say.
That's right. Yeah, I've tested it myself. You have to go in somewhere. One moment. Share my screen. This is when I should have shared the entire screen and not just the window, but never mind. We'll get there in a minute. Yes. So you have to activate your voiceover somewhere in your settings. I hope this is right, Manuel. Voice. Turn voiceover on. Yeah, so you can do that. Run it on your page, and then it says what the screen reader will say, basically. It is the screen reader. And sometimes it can be quite alarming if you haven't set things up properly. So yes, very good tip there. Thank you for that.
Maybe an additional tip. There's also a shortcut, Command F5. If you press it, it will also launch VoiceOver. Yes. And if you try it most likely won't work, and you will be disappointed by how these things work and overwhelmed. But if it's just too much, then just quit and try tomorrow again. And it takes some time to get into using a screen reader, because it's really different to how you're used to use a web page compared to the usual way. And if you're testing, don't use a website, an existing website. Just create a very simple HTML document with a set of basic elements like a heading and a list and maybe a form, and then try to navigate on this page. Don't use a full-blown website, because first, it's most likely inaccessible, so hard to use, and second of all, it's just too complicated if you're getting started.
Yes, start small. Good tips.
Yes.
Way back at the beginning of the stream, Debjit was asking how to create a wireframe using HTML. Any no code or low code, or code your own template, which is interesting because I wanted to talk to you about how to turn a design into an HTML document. Is there a way to approach writing your HTML to make sure it's going to be the best it can be?
This is a fantastic question because it's an important topic and also one we don't talk enough about. And you might expect a very technical answer here, but it's more a matter of workflow and process. And what I mean by that, let me try to explain what I mean by that. So it really depends on how and where you work. So maybe you work in a small agency with a small team, and maybe you have direct contact to the designer of the page, or maybe you are the designer yourself. But you might also work in a larger company where there are teams where you don't have any direct contact to designers or to editors, for example. Or like it was the case with me for many years when I was a freelancer, you just work for agencies and they will call you and tell you, hey, we have this website, we have a design, come visit us, take a look and tell us how much it costs. And if it works like that, so if you only get the design and you are supposed to turn this into HTML, this is already a problem, because ideally in a perfect world, you as a front-end developer are involved in the decision-making and the design and the thinking process from the very beginning, even before the designer starts to design the page, because you as a developer can give a lot of valuable feedback. Like you can tell, you can talk about limitations. You can also make suggestions about the structure of a page, what will work for users, what won't work. If we would work, if all of us would work like that, so if all the people responsible for a website or a project or a web app, whatever, are involved from the very beginning, many websites would be in a much better shape. So if designer, developers, editors, and also the project people sit together on the table and talk about how to structure the page. Of course, there are more opinions there, but also some smart ideas. So this is the first thing that, this is, if a project starts like that, so if everyone is involved, it will turn out much better immediately. You can trust me on that. This is the first thing. The second thing is that a lot of people believe that turning a design into code, into HTML, is a purely visual task. What I mean by that is that you just look at design, like a Figma or a Sketch or Photoshop, whatever. You look at the design, you see things, and then you try to translate that to HTML. For example, there is huge type and it's bold, so it's probably the H1 on the page. Now, this might be true, but it might also just be large text or some text, a paragraph that happens to be large in this design. So it's really important that the visuals of a design don't influence us too much in the decision-making process when it comes to deciding what kind of element something on a page is. Can I quickly share my screen to give you an example?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Just a second. Okay, you should see WordPress.com, right?
I think if I press that, yeah, no, that's the right one. Good. Yes,
yeah?
Here we are.
Okay, so there's really large type here. It says, welcome to the world's most popular website builder. Which is fine, okay. If I scroll down, there's also large type. It says, build a site, sell your stuff, start a blog, and so much more. And then it says, all on WordPress.com, and then it says, build simply. Okay, so one of the first tasks is you look at the site and you try to figure out how it's structured. So how many headings are there and how is the hierarchy of the headings? So you could say, welcome to the world's most popular website builder is maybe the H1, or maybe it's not. the H1 should be as just descriptive as possible about what's on the page. The problem I have with this, if this is the H1, it doesn't say anywhere WordPress. So I would try to include that in the H1, both for ScreenReader users, but also for search engines. Anyways, then this is a smaller type. It could be an H2, but it also just could be a paragraph. And here's this build simply text here. This is definitely an H2 for me, because it introduces this section here with all these example designs or whatever it is. So this is an introductory content. So this is how I would structure it. This could be the H1, and this could be an H2, and that's it. But if we look at the structure of WordPress.com, you will see that it's, can you see that? I'm not sure if I can, I can zoom. So it says there's an H1, welcome to the world's most popular website builder. Then there's an H2, which is this thing here. And then there's an H6. Oh. So the all on WordPress.com is an H6. And what happened there is, I guess, of course, I don't know. I didn't build the website. I also don't know the people who built it. But what happened there is they saw this all on text. They thought, hey, wait a minute. We have this somewhere else in the design. It looks exactly the same. It just looks like an H6. So we will use an H6 here. But using H6 doesn't make sense, as well as using an H2 here, because we only use headings to introduce a section or a subsection on our page. But this build a site and also the all on, they don't introduce anything. These are just paragraphs. This is just text.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty complicated stuff. So that's why I showed an example. And I will show you one more example on WordPress.com. So if I scroll down in this list of headings, by the way, I'm using an extension called Totally. So TOTA11Y. And this allows me to just simply show the structure of the page. If I scroll down here, you can see there are a lot of H5s. A lot of, like, incredibly, how many H5s there are. I mean, I don't believe that I've ever used an H5 or an H6 on any page, because usually if your website is that deeply structured, it's probably a good idea to separate content and just create another document, because, yeah, I rarely use H5, but they have a lot of H5s. If you scroll down, you can see that they're using the H5 element here for this list of features.
Oh.
Yeah. And again, I believe that this happened because they wanted to display the features in a certain way, and they just made that a visual decision. I don't know if that makes sense. So that they saw something in their design system that looked like the thing that they wanted here, and they picked this element out of convenience, or maybe just because they didn't know. But using headings here doesn't make sense, because, like I said, a heading introduces content, and here the H3 introduces the section, but there is no content, because the next thing is an H4, and the H4 again introduces something, but there is no content because there's another introductory heading, and so on.
Yes, and that extension there, as Luca has hopefully typed out, totally with an 11. Yes, so yes. You can go check that one out. Here it is. Very handy extension there. I'm glad you brought that up about H5s and H6s, because I've often wondered, does anyone actually use an H6? So I can't imagine a situation where that would be useful. So I'm glad it's not just me that thinks they're a bit over the top, let's say. Yeah. Yes.
And there's one more, another thing that I want to, that's important when turning a design to code, is that, again, it's also about this, the idea that this is a purely visual task. If you look at a certain element, you have to decide how, which HTML element it is. So how you will structure it, how you will mark it up in your document, and then later you have to decide how it will look like, but you also have to think about its functionality. So not just about the visual, so how does it look like, but also what does it do? And this is really important because there are things in a design that are not visible in the design, but they should be in the document. And this is where it gets tricky, because how do you turn things into code that you don't see? Let me give you another example, if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
I'm here on the website of my friend Max Buck. Right away, I have to say this is not a bad example. This website is phenomenal. It's beautifully designed. It's also well built. It's accessible and super fast. And also, Max is a great developer and also writes great articles. But I've used it in an earlier talk, so I know this website well, and this is why I picked it as an example. So you can see this is his homepage, and at the very top right on his website, there is a navigation, and there's also this how is it called in English? Paint roller? Is it a paint roller? Yeah, okay. A paint roller icon. And let's just assume this is not a website. This is a design, a mock-up. And we're looking at it. And if we would only judge by the visuals, I would say this is an SVG. That's all I need. I will just turn this into an SVG element. But this thing also has a functionality. You can click it. And you can see if you click it, there is this panel that pops up, and you can change the design or the theme of the website. Of course, my favorite theme is the lobster theme. You can see the cursor turning into a lobster.
Very nice.
So now that we know that, we should now realize that we have to add more HTML, because this icon here is not just an icon, it's an interactive element. Why do I know that's an interactive element? Because I can click it, or I'm supposed to click it. So I have to wrap this SVG in a button, because if I have some interaction, usually with JavaScript, I usually use a button element. Okay, so this is one thing that I don't see in the design, but I should add to the site. To the document. Another thing is, you can see that this panel opens and closes as you click the button. I know that because I see it. But how would a blind user know, or a blind screen reader user know that the panel is open? They need some kind of feedback. They need some kind of information that the panel is open or closed. And it's the button's job to convey that information. And you can do that by using the ARIA expanded attribute. So there's an ARIA. The ARIA specification is specifically built for JavaScript stuff, for custom JavaScript stuff, you could say. And if you want to convey the information that the panel is open, that the button has opened the panel, we put the ARIA expanded attribute on the button and set the value to true. Let's just quickly check if Max did that. And of course he did. So he set ARIA expanded to false because it's closed. And when I click it, you can see that he changes it to true. And if now a screen reader user finds this button, the screen reader will say something like button, the label of the button, I don't know, theme, and expanded. And if it's closed, it will say something like button, theme, collapsed. This is important information for a screen reader user because they have to know whether or not the panel is open. And again, that's something that's not visible in the design, but it should be in the document.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Sakil has a question to this icon, which is an interesting one. Would it have helped if the paint roller icon was pulsating in a subtle way to indicate it's a button? So you do see on sites these days some kind of animation or something like that. Is that actually useful?
I have to say that maybe that there was somehow that somehow got lost, but I said that we just imagine that this is not a proper website, but it's just a design mock-up built in some kind of graphical program like Figma or Photoshop. So before the development phase, when we try to figure out which element to use. So yeah, I mean, does animation help? Of course, sometimes it helps. In this case, I would say that I don't know. I mean, I get suspicious when I see an icon like that, so it looks really interesting. I don't know what it is, and as I move the cursor over the element, there's an hover state. And for me personally, this is enough to know that okay, I can do something here. But sometimes, of course, animation is great for helping users perform a certain task.
Good. And Liban is asking how to choose anchors or buttons in some scenarios.
Okay, that's also a great question. Let me just quickly stop sharing. If you click on a thing and it brings you to another page, or it links to, or it opens your email program, or it opens on your smartphone the phone or calling functionality, or it brings you somewhere else on the page like an anchor, then it's probably a link. So if you navigate somewhere else, it's a link. If it performs some kind of custom JavaScript action, or if it submits a form, it's a button. And this formula works in, I would say, 95% of use cases.
Okay.
Sometimes if you have like really complicated components where you can do all kinds of things, where you have this like a mix of JavaScript, like a modal window pops up, but you can also navigate to a help page, but at the same time you can change settings and all in one component, then things get complicated. But in most scenarios, it's just like if you navigate somewhere else, if you link to an email, to a phone number, or to an anchor, it's a link. Otherwise, it's a button.
Good. Hope that answers your question, Liban. Couple of people are asking about the SEO side of things. Are head components that important for a website with less traffic? And going back to the previous site that had millions of H5s everywhere, aren't the H tags used by Google SEO? What would you like to share with us about the SEO side of things in relation to HTML?
So historically, headings were really important for search engines. Like they relied a lot on the heading structure and whether or not you're using an H1. But today it doesn't really matter. Google specifically, they have all kinds of different heuristics and algorithms to decide whether or not a heading structure makes sense and what's important on a page. So for example, if you use a div and this div is the largest type, it has the largest font size on your website, Google will think that it's important, that it's the most important heading, maybe on the same level or even more important than H1. So they have all kinds of different algorithms and stuff that goes into deciding what's important on a page, and they don't look too much on headings anymore. From an SEO perspective, it doesn't matter that much anymore. From an accessibility perspective, it's incredibly important. It's important because if you remember earlier, I said the basic thing a ScreenReader does is to read the content on a page. Just read it out loud. But this is not the convenient way of surfing the web. So imagine that you use a software to read all the contents on a page from top to bottom. This is like really a really daunting task. You won't do that. I mean, if you open a page, you start reading at the top left and just read all the contents on the page? Probably not. So this is why ScreenReaders also offer different ways of navigating on a site. So for example, you can use a shortcut to jump from heading to heading. And the screenreader will say something like H1, Scrimba, H2, our courses, H2, our students, I don't know, H2, our alumni, H3, from the year to 2020 or something like that. And this is a really, really convenient and nice way to serve a website just by using headings and jumping from heading to heading. And this is why it's really important that there's just one H1 because the H1 is the most important heading on the page. It describes what the page is about. And then you structure larger sections using H2s. And if these larger sections have some subsections, you use H3 and so on. And you might need H4. You probably don't need H5, but it might happen. And in some rare cases, you might even need H6.
That's interesting what you said about the algorithm realizing that the bigger text is more important. But is that always a good thing? Because occasionally you might have big text that's sort of used as a background, but it's not actually meant to be a heading. Could that get messy?
Yes. So we had an SEO audit, so similar to an accessibility audit, but specifically for search engine optimization by an external company. And we had this case where we have a sticky header, and the type in the header was a bit larger than the type of the H1, and they complained about it. They said, you have to fix this, make it just some pixels smaller, because this might be confusing to Google. They might think that the heading on all pages is always the same, because because we're using the same, of course, the same term or the same title in the header. So the title in the header is not the title of the page, but just of the whole site. It would say something like City of Vienna, for example, on every site. And this type was larger than the type of the H1. And they complained about that and told us to fix it. Yeah. So it can get messy.
Interesting.
But I have to say, I'm not an SEO expert. So the things that I just said are based on, first of all, the experts that I talked to, and also on a video by one of the major or main SEO people at Google. So he said in this video, he answered this question on YouTube and said that so many things go into deciding what's important on the page that the heading structure doesn't matter too much anymore.
Wow, who knew? I have learned something today. Chrome Chef has come up with a question which is very interesting to me, because this has occurred to me while coding. Wants to know what text is preferred, the stuff which is written directly into the HTML, or that which is added via JavaScript. So you can either hard code your HTML, or you can add things dynamically with JS. Does that make any difference to the HTML output, the accessibility, the SEO?
Chrome Chef wants to talk about religion. It depends on who you ask. So if you ask me, I would tell you all the text content should be in the HTML document. Only use JavaScript if you really need it. So just sprinkle it on top of a website for interaction and stuff like that, like we saw with the theme roller thingy. But like the basic content should be in the HTML. First of all, for search engines, it makes it much easier for search engines to crawl your page, to understand, to read the content on your page. And second of all, JavaScript is awesome. I write JavaScript every day, but at the same time, it's also not reliable. Things can go wrong, or much more things can go wrong when you write JavaScript in comparison to rendering stuff on the server. And but sometimes, of course, yes, you add content dynamically. You use fetch or some other way to inject content into a page. If you do that, what's really important is that you first understand that search engines might not know of this content because it's not there at the time of rendering, or it might not be there. And the second thing is that you have to make ScreenReader users aware that something has changed on the page. So whenever you change the DOM, whenever something happens, like you inject content or you reorder a list, for example, you have to announce that change. And there are different ways of doing that using the ARIA standard. But yeah, it's important to do that if you add content via JavaScript. And I mean, like I said, I built my website first website more than 20 years ago. I've been around for a while, and I'm also a huge fan of HTML. So I will always tell you that you start with HTML first, and this is the most the most basic and the most essential foundation of any website. and that you probably don't need that much JavaScript. And I forgot what I wanted to say. That's my opinion, but there are also other opinions. People will tell you different things, but it just gets more complicated when you use JavaScript. That's the baseline. And my battery is almost low. I will just quickly get my charger. I'm sorry, I forgot to plug my laptop in.
Yes, go ahead. I will read through some of the comments while we do that. Archie says, "Hi Manuel, let's go to HTML heaven. I have the perfect sound effect for that." Yes, thank you for the lovely comment. If you have any other HTML questions, comments, drop them into that chat and I'll do my best to ask them while we're here. And yes, let's talk a little bit about divs. They get a lot of bad press, I suppose. Should we never use a div? Are divs really bad?
A few weeks ago, I wrote an article called "Divs Are Bad." So I guess the question is based on this article, maybe. No, of course not. Divs are great. Divs are fantastic. They're a fantastic tool to structure your page. Sometimes you might use it for styling, especially. So if you're working on some complicated CSS stuff and you just need an additional element to make styling easier or even possible, you use a div. Or if you want to create special landmarks in your page, which is also, again, an accessibility ARIA thing. You can read about it on HTMHell, by the way. Then you might need a div. So divs are great. Just what I wouldn't do is to add divs preemptively. Is this the right word?
I think so, yeah. Okay. If there's another option, you mean, or...
And what I mean is that you shouldn't add it before you need them, just in case you might need them. That's what I want to say.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people like to do it. They just add divs and they say, I might need it later in CSS. This is something I wouldn't recommend doing. And also when you're working with JavaScript frameworks, with some of them, you have to wrap your content in components in a wrapper elements, and a lot of people like to just use a div. And if every component has a wrapper div, you get a lot of divs, nested divs in the document. And some people even call this divitis, so like a div disease. The problem with that is it can be bad for performance. So you should try to keep the number of DOM nodes low. And sometimes divs also break accessibility. An example is, let's say you have a field set. So if the field set is an element that you can use to group certain form elements that belong together, and you can label this group using the legend element. So you have the field set, and then you have the legend, and following the legend, you have your input fields. If you wrap, and the legend serves as the label for the field set. So if a ScreenReader user finds this field set, it will say something like my form fields group, because the value of the legend element is my form fields. But if you wrap this legend in a div or in any other element, but let's just say in a div, this information might get lost. So the ScreenReader might not announce anything anymore, because it's a rule in HTML that the legend must be a direct descendant of the field set element. And this is the same for the figure element and fig caption, and the details element and summary, and the UL and the OL and LI. So the list item element must be a direct descendant of UL or OL. With definition lists, that's different. So in a definition list, you have DT, the definition term, and DD, the definition description, and you can nest them in a div. So the definition list is an exception here. So there are some examples or some scenarios where a div can be bad, but generally speaking, the div is great, but please just only use it if you really need it.
Yes, good. Debjet says, use a section or a div for separate blocks. Now, my other question I wanted to ask was, are sections bad? Now, this wasn't something that I ever thought about before, but in our Friday coding live stream last week, I think we used a section and someone said, a section is just a div renamed. And I thought, actually, does it have any semantic meaning? Should we avoid sections where we can as well? What do you think?
The person who said that is right, kind of. Half right. I don't know if you can say that. So the section element, I mean, you probably have to look up first the definition of the section element. But as far as I know, the definition of the section element is that it's a thematic grouping of content. So you can use it to group content on a page that belongs together. So for example, let me just quickly share the screen again, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Do you see... let's just take this Measure Magazine website. Okay, so yeah, let's take this. So do you see these latest posts, 4 articles in a grid?
Yep.
Okay, so this could be a section. You can say, okay, all these articles are within a section. The section has a heading, it's a latest posts. And by using the section, you're defining these things belong together in this grouping. And the benefits of the section element is that, first of all, you have a semantic element that by looking at it will tell you this is a larger group of contents that belong together. So if I look at the code, I know, okay, good, these things belong together. This is a larger group on the site. And there might be another larger group of the site that says that's the smashing family, and so on. The second benefit is that you have a hook in CSS to style these things. So you can just select the section using the section tag selector and style all sections in the same way. So this is great, but yes, semantically, it doesn't convey any information. So if you find a section on a page, it's pretty much the same thing as the div, unless you label it. And this is a really important part about the section element. So there's a post on HTML about the section element. And let me just quickly find it. Yes. So if you just leave it at the default, just a section element and maybe a heading, you probably want to use a heading if you're using a section, then it's pretty much just a div. But if you label it using, for example, aria labeled by creates a reference to an element with a certain ID. So if I put aria labeled by on the section element, it searches for an element with the ID results. And you can see here is an H2. And now we're labeling the section with the value from this H2. So the label of the section is now results. And when we do that, when we use aria labeled by or aria label to label the section, we are changing the semantic meaning of the section element. And now all of a sudden, it's not just a generic element like the div. Now it's a region. And now that it's a region, it's also a landmark. A landmark is an important part of your page, like the header, the footer, the main content, the search if you want to, and the side elements, or secondary content related to the main content. All these elements are landmarks, and they define larger, usually larger or important parts of your page. So by default, no semantic meaning. As soon as you start to label it, it now all of a sudden receives semantic meaning. And a follow-up question might now be, why would I want that? Why would I want to label a section if I don't see it? Well, for ScreenReader users, because as already mentioned earlier, there are different ways of navigating on a site using a screen reader. There's just reading the content. There is using navigation by using headings, and there's also navigation using landmarks. So as a ScreenReader user, I can just list all the landmarks. Here's an example from VoiceOver. List all the landmarks on a page and jump directly to a landmark. And this is a really convenient way of navigating because I don't have to go through all the content of the page. I can just say, jump directly to the main content or jump directly to the navigation on the web page. This is where landmarks are really, really useful. Here's an example on the Smashing website. You have the title, you have some metadata about this article, and you have this quick summary. And if we look at the code, you will see that the quick summary is a section and it's labeled quick summary. What does it mean? It means that the quick summary is a landmark. And for ScreenReader users this means for ScreenReader users that they can just quickly, without having to interact with any other content on the page, read the quick summary of the article, get an idea if the content or the article is interesting for them, and then read the whole thing or just ignore it. This is just a really convenient way of accessing important parts of your page.
So, the person who brought this topic up in our live stream is actually here. Hello, Sarah. Yes. We were talking about, apparently, I don't really remember this, so I'm glad Sarah does, if you could use some particular CSS on a section, as if a section needed special consideration. Yes, thank you, Sarah, for coming along to 2 streams in a row and for giving me food for thought with these different elements. It's very thought-provoking. One question caught my eye from Luca. Sections and articles. I still have problems choosing between them. Can you shed any light on that one, Manuel?
The situation is similar. So I already explained how sections work and when you should use them. And if you're not sure, just don't use a section at all. It will be fine. Usually, just if you're not sure, don't do it. If you know what you're doing, then you might find it useful to have this ability to turn a section into a landmark. But otherwise, it's better to just not do it and don't break anything. When it comes to articles, I mean, I don't have the official definition in front of me, but with article you usually wrap content that is self-contained, that works in the context of the page it lives in, but also would work in another context. That's a bit of a complex explanation here. What I mean is, for example, a tweet. A tweet works on the Twitter website or a post on Facebook, but if you take it out of that context and you put it on another website or in a feed reader, or you just embed it in an article, it will work as well. Or if you take a blog post, it works on the blog, on the website itself. But if you're using a feed reader that just fetches the content from the article, it will also work in this reader. So this is how you mark up articles. Now, some of you might say, okay, I mean, it will also work if I just don't use an article, right? If we just use a div, and that's right, absolutely. But again, it has some additional functionality for screen readers. So articles might be announced as article. So with a special article role, which helps screen reader users understand what this thing is. And you might also get additional ways of navigating on the site. So you might be able to jump from article to article on a web page. So it's it comes with useful functionality, but again, if you're not sure, just don't use it. I think you're muted, or at least I don't hear
I was indeed muted, yes. Not anymore. Thank you for the question there. And we are up to an hour already, and we didn't get through even half of my questions, which just goes to show how much there is to learn about HTML. So head on over to HTMHell and read all about it. And don't forget also to, well, this actually is the heaven section. There's a hell section and there's a heaven section. So go and check those out. And I will try to put some of this new knowledge into action this Friday on our next coding live stream. We're going to be coding some custom confetti. Yes, that'll be fun. Looking forward to that. So don't forget to hit your subscribe button, as Christine has already done today. Thank you, Christine. So you don't miss out on our live streams. And if you enjoyed this, give us a shout out on Twitter. Here's Manuel. And here am I. It always annoys me that that doesn't go to my profile. Anyway, here I am. Come and say hello. Let me know who to talk to next on the live stream. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Manuel. It was a very interesting session. I feel like I've learned a lot. It was great to have you.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for asking very smart questions and interesting questions. And I hope that I was able to answer all of them, even with my somewhat broken Austrian English. If you have any further questions, if you are interested in web accessibility and HTML content, then you can follow me on Twitter. Or just the HTMHell channel. I try to post something on HTMHell whenever I find the time, which isn't often at the moment, but I promise that I will share more bad and good code on HTML in the future.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you for the wonderful answers and a great session. We'll be back very soon. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.